I simply asked when my son's new bar was opening, and his wife told me they had already celebrated yesterday. Now, at 2 in the morning. That betrayal has escalated to a crowbar smashing against my front door. My son is screaming outside, demanding assets he thinks he is owed, completely unaware that I am not cowering in fear. I am standing here with my lawyer, recording every violent thud, waiting for them to seal their own fate. My name is Margaret Hayes, and tonight, at 67 years old, I am listening to my only son try to break into my home. The house is an old timber structure perched on the high ridge overlooking Port Lark, usually a sanctuary of silence and sea breeze. But tonight, the air is shattered by violence. Thud. The sound vibrates through the floorboards. It is not a knock. It is a collision of rage against wood. Mother, open this door right now. Maya's voice pierces the heavy oak, shrill and bordering on hysteria. Open it, or we're breaking it down. I'm serious. Margaret. I sit up in bed, the quilt pooling around my waist. I do not reach for the phone to call the police. Not yet. Instead, I listen. Beneath Maya's screaming, there is another sound. It is the distinct, grinding scrape of heavy metal dragging across the stone steps of my porch. A crowbar, or perhaps a tire iron. I reach for the tablet on my nightstand. My fingers are steady. I am surprised by my own calm. I tap the screen, bringing up the live feed from the security cameras hidden in the eaves. The screen glows blue in the dark room, revealing the scene outside in high definition. Ethan is there. My son. His face is flushed a deep, splotchy red, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool night air. He wears a suit that looks expensive but ill-fitting, the tie loosened, his collar unbuttoned. In his right hand, he grips a rusted crowbar. He raises it and slams it against the doorframe again. If you don't open this... Mom? Ethan yells, his voice cracking. He pauses, breathing hard, trying to lower his pitch, trying to sound authoritative. I will show this whole town just how crazy you've become. Don't make me do this. Don't make me force my way in for your own good. He is performing. He is trying to build a narrative of the concerned son dealing with a senile mother, even as he wields a weapon. From the shadows in the corner of my bedroom, a deep, steady voice speaks. Let them scream for 2 more minutes, Harold Knox says. My lawyer steps into the pale light of the tablet's screen. He is over 40, wearing a dark turtleneck, looking like a man who has seen every ugly side of human nature. All of this is being recorded, every threat, every blow to the door. Tonight is the end of everything. Margaret. I look back at the screen. I feel a sharp, physical pain in the center of my chest. But it is not a heart attack. It is heartbreak. I remember Ethan's graduation day. I remember how he wept on my shoulder, terrified of the future, and how I held him and promised he would never fall. Now, that same boy is outside, trying to destroy my home to claim assets he believes are his birthright. I slide my legs out of bed. My feet touch the cold floor. I stand up and tighten the belt of my robe. I walk out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The house is dark, but I know every creak of these floors. I pass the living room. 2 figures are waiting there in the gloom. Nadine, my best friend, sits on the armchair with her hands clasped tight in her lap. She does not look at me. She just nods, her face pale. Beside the window stands Ruiz, the head of the private security team I hired weeks ago. He is silent, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the front door. They are my witnesses. They are ready. I approach the foyer. The banging is louder here. I can see the door shudder in its frame with each impact. I reach out. My hand hovers over the cold brass lock before I turn it. A memory slashes through my mind. It is sharp and clean, like a paper cut. It is Maya's voice over the phone, months ago, when I asked about the opening date of the new bar. We celebrated yesterday. That was the moment. That was the instant I ceased to be a mother and became a target. I take a deep breath, gripping the deadbolt. I am not the prey anymore. I am the one opening the cage. I did not come from money. I came from soot. I grew up in a town in the Rust Belt, where the sky was permanently the color of a bruised lung. My father was a mechanic, who washed grease from his hands with pumice soap every night until his skin was raw. And my mother smelled like stale beer and cheap perfume from her double shifts at the local pub. I learned early that survival was something you did with your hands. By the time I was 19, I was working the graveyard shift at a roadside dive off the interstate. That was my real education, far more valuable than any classroom. I learned how to pour a draft beer without too much foam, but more importantly, I learned how to listen. I listened to truck drivers who had not been home in weeks, to soldiers on leave who were terrified of going back, and to men who had just lost their jobs at the plant. I realized then that a bar is not just a place to drink. It is a waiting room for lost souls, a place where people go when they cannot face the quiet of their own homes. I saved every quarter. It took me years of living on beans and rice, but I finally scraped together enough to buy a rotting building down by the docks in Port Lark. The roof leaked and the floorboards were warped, but it was mine. I scraped the paint, sanded the wood until my shoulders burned, and hung a new sign, Docklight Tavern. I wanted it to be a place where a man could wash off the day's grime and feel human again. A warm light in the cold fog of the harbour. Patrick came into the picture around then. He was a merchant marine, a gentle giant who spent 9 months of the year on the water. We built a life in the spaces between his voyages. We had Ethan and Lily. Ethan was sharp as a tack from the start, but he looked at a mop bucket like it was an infectious disease. Lily was different. She was quiet, steady. The kind of girl who would pick up a rag and start wiping a table without being asked. As the docklight grew, I had to grow with it. I taught myself to balance ledgers at 3 a.m. I learned how to stare down a health inspector who was looking for a bribe, and how to negotiate with liquor distributors who thought they could overcharge a woman. It was a hard world, full of unwritten rules, but I made sure my business was clean and respected. Slowly, the single tavern became a small empire. I opened Beacon Alley near the fish market, and then the Harbour Line Lounge uptown. I formed a company, Larkside Hospitality Group. It sounded grand, but the office was just my kitchen table covered in receipts and coffee stains. We sent Ethan to a university in the city to study business administration. I paid for everything: tuition, housing, books. I wanted him to have the soft hands of a gentleman, to never know the ache of standing on concrete for 12 hours. Lily stayed local, studying accounting so she could help me with the payroll. I always tried to compensate for the time I spent working. I would come home after closing, my knees throbbing with arthritis, and start cooking a pot roast at 2 a.m. so Ethan would have a home-cooked meal when he visited. I hid my limp. I hid the fatigue. I believed that if I gave them the world I never had, they would love me for it. I thought gratitude was a natural return on investment. That faith began to crack the day Ethan brought Maya home. She was a marketing representative for a craft liquor brand, pretty and polished, with a smile that showed too many teeth. She called me Mom right away, but I saw her eyes. She did not look at the Docklight Tavern and see the history or the community. She looked at the vintage mahogany bar and calculated what it would fetch at an auction. I remember her running a manicured fingernail along the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This place has so much potential," she said, looking at Ethan rather than me. "With a little rebranding, you could double your margins on the cocktail list. The rustic look is very in right now." "It's not a look." "Maya," I said, wiping a glass. "It's just old. Old is money." "Margaret," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You just have to know how to extract the value." I should have known then. I should have seen that she wasn't looking at a family business. She was looking at a carcass she couldn't wait to strip. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Patrick died on a Tuesday, halfway across the Atlantic, his heart stopping before his ship could even turn back toward the coast. I was 61. Ethan was 33. Lily was 30. We buried an empty casket on the hill because it took 2 weeks for his body to come home. But by then, the title of widow had already settled onto my shoulders like a wet wool coat. The dirt on the grave was barely settled when the conversations shifted. It started subtly, over casseroles brought by neighbors and stale coffee in the living room. Ethan did not talk about his father's kindness or his laugh. He talked about legacy, a word that sounded corporate coming from his mouth. "The docklight is a relic, Mom," Ethan said one evening, swirling whiskey in a glass that had belonged to Patrick. "We need to pivot. Craft cocktails. A DJ on weekends. The tourist crowd from the city is where the margin is. Locals drinking domestic beer. That's a dying model." I looked at him, feeling the ache in my joints. "Those locals paid for your degree." "Ethan?" Maya placed a hand on my arm. Her skin was cool, her touch light but firm. "He just means we want to secure your future. Margaret, you should be resting now. You've worked like a dog for 40 years. Why don't you let us handle the heavy lifting?" It sounded sweet. It sounded like love. But then came the follow-up, slipped in between bites of apple pie. "By the way, Mom, how is the ownership structure set up currently? Is everything just in your name? Because for tax purposes, that's messy." The seeds of doubt were planted with surgical precision. Ethan began bringing his iPad to Sunday dinners, turning family meals into board meetings. He would slide the screen toward me, showing colorful charts and graphs that meant nothing to me. "It's about risk management," he said, tapping the glass screen. "If something happens to you, a fall, a stroke like Dad, the state could freeze everything. We need a succession plan. We need to transfer assets while you're still capable." He let the word hang there. Capable. Lily sat across the table, pushing peas around her plate. She looked tired. Her husband, a soft-spoken high school teacher, nodded along with Ethan. "Maybe they're right. Margaret, let the young people worry about the stress." I began to second-guess myself. I forgot my keys on the counter one afternoon. A simple slip of the mind. Maya was there instantly, her voice pitched high enough for the staff to hear. "Oh, Margaret." Again she sighed, picking up the keys and dangling them like she was scolding a child. "You left the stove on last week too. Remember? We're really getting worried about you." I had not left the stove on. I was sure of it. But looking at her concern, looking at Ethan's furrowed brow, a cold worm of fear started to eat at my gut. Was I slipping? Was the grief taking pieces of my mind with it? The pressure mounted. "Sell the Harbour Line Lounge," Ethan urged. "It's dead weight. We can use the capital to renovate the docklight. Everything is in your name." "Mom, and that is dangerous," Maya whispered. "What if you get confused and sign the wrong thing?" I felt cornered in my own home. Guilty for aging, guilty for holding on to what I had built. I started to believe them. I started to think that maybe I was the problem. Then came the night that stopped my heart cold. It was late, past 2 in the morning. I was closing up the docklight, checking the back locks. I looked out the window toward the parking lot. Under the yellow haze of the street lamp, I saw Maya. She was standing next to a silver sedan, smoking a cigarette, something she claimed she never did. She was talking to a man. I squinted. It was Dr. Aris, a young neurologist who had just moved to town. I cracked the window just an inch. The wind carried their voices. "Early onset diagnosis is key," the doctor was saying, his voice low. "If we can establish a pattern of decline—" "She forgets things constantly," Maya said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "She's becoming unmanageable. We need that assessment paper. Eris, Ethan is getting impatient." I closed the window. My hand was trembling, but not from age. I walked out the back door 5 minutes later, forcing a smile as I passed them. "Who was that, dear?" I asked, clutching my purse. Maya stomped on the cigarette, her smile snapping back into place instantly. "Oh, just a friend from college. Passing through. Nothing to worry about." "Mum, you look tired. Let me drive you home." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since Patrick died, my mind was crystal clear. "No," I said, "I can drive myself." The call that shattered my life came at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. It was Ricky, a former barback who had moved on to work at a bistro downtown. "Babe. I mean, Mrs. Hayes." Ricky stammered over the line. "I just wanted to say congrats. I hear Ethan is opening that new place, the Copper Finch, down on Warehouse Row. That's prime real estate. Must be proud." I stood in my kitchen, a coffee mug halfway to my mouth. I lowered it slowly to the counter. "What are you talking about?" "Ricky, we aren't opening anything on Warehouse Row." "Oh," Ricky said, the awkwardness radiating through the phone. I saw the permits posted. And the trucks. They're stocking the bar today. Sorry, I must have heard wrong." He hung up, but the silence he left behind was deafening. My hands were cold. I picked up the phone again and dialed Ethan. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Nothing. I called Maya. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight, impatient. "Mom, is everything okay? I'm in a meeting. I just wanted to know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "When the opening party for the Copper Finch is, I'd like to mark my calendar." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. "Oh," Maya said, her tone shifting to a fake, sugary brightness that made my teeth ache. "That it's nothing big. Mom, really, it's just a soft launch. We celebrated yesterday. It was just Maya's side of the family. We didn't want to overwhelm you with the noise. You know how you get with loud music lately." It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. It wasn't just that I hadn't been invited, it was the dismissal. I was being managed. I was a problem to be worked around. And the paperwork I asked, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles turned white. Who signed for the liquor license? Maya Ethan doesn't have the credentials yet. We just used your existing master license for the application, she said breezily. It was just faster, for convenience. Don't worry your head about the boring stuff. Go watch your shows. The line went dead. She had used my name, my reputation, my clean record of 40 years to launch a business I was excluded from. I did not go watch my shows. That night, I drove to the small brick building where we kept the Larkside Hospitality Group offices. I knew Ethan and Maya met there on Tuesday nights to go over numbers. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, letting the shadows cover me. I let myself in the back door with the key they thought I had lost months ago. I moved down the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps. The door to the conference room was ajar. Light spilled out, cutting across the dark floor. I stopped at just outside, pressing my back against the wall. It's a slam dunk. Ethan? Maya's voice drifted out, clear and sharp. Dr. Aris is ready to sign the affidavit. We have the incidents documented. The lost keys. The stove. The confusion about dates. We paint a picture of mild dementia progressing rapidly. I don't know, Ethan said. His voice sounded thick. Maybe he was drinking. Putting her in a home. She's going to hate it. She won't know the difference in 6 months, Maya snapped. Listen to me. When the court declares her mentally incompetent, the power of attorney kicks in. Total guardianship. That means all the liquor licenses, the real estate, the company accounts. They all fall under your control. I held my breath. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. And then Ethan asked. Then? Maya said. We sell the Docklight and the Beacon to Blue Meridian Holdings. They've been offering $3 million for that waterfront property for years. We liquidate the old, rotting assets and pour everything into the Copper Finch brand. We franchise. There was the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then, Ethan laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. I guess you're right, he said. And the facility in Pine Creek is nice. 5-star care. She'll be comfortable. And we won't have to hear her complaining about the locals and the price of domestic beer anymore. It's a win-win. I stepped back into the darkness. The image of the little boy I had carried on my hip, the boy I had cooked roast for at 2 a.m, disintegrated. In his place was a stranger who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle to be removed and a resource to be harvested. I did not burst into the room. I did not scream. I turned around and walked out of the building, closing the back door silently behind me. I stood in the cool night air, looking at the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. They wanted to use the law to bury me. They wanted to use my own name to erase me. If you want to play dirty, I whispered to the empty street, I will play by the rules, but not your rules. I did not go to the family attorney who had drafted our simple wills 30 years ago. I went to Harold Knox. Harold was a commercial litigator known for handling high-stakes asset disputes, a man with a reputation for being cold, expensive, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting his clients. He was exactly what I needed. I sat in his glass-walled office, the skyline of the city grey behind him, and laid out my life in paper. I handed him the printed emails, the text messages Maya had sent regarding cognitive assessments, and the notes I had taken during my eavesdropping session at the office. Harold read them in silence, He did not offer tea or sympathy. He read like a surgeon looking at an X-ray. This is not a family squabble. Mrs. Hayes, Harold said, finally looking up over his spectacles. This is a hostile corporate takeover disguised as elder care. They are building a case to strip you of your agency. I know, I replied, my voice steady. I want to stop them, and I want to make sure they can never touch what I built again. We went to work. Under Harold's guidance, I established the Docklight Legacy Trust. We transferred the deeds to the Docklight Tavern, Beacon Alley, and the Harbour Line Lounge into the trust immediately. Then came the poison pill. We inserted a specific clause: any beneficiary who challenged the mental capacity of the grantor, or who attempted to place the grantor under involuntary guardianship, would be automatically and permanently disinherited. It is a dead man's switch, Harold explained, tapping the document with his pen. If Ethan pulls the trigger on his plan to declare you incompetent, he blows up his own inheritance. 2 days later, I drove to a notary in a neighbouring town, 40 miles away, to change my will. I wanted no one in Port Lark to catch wind of it. I removed Ethan as executor. I appointed Lily as the independent monitor of the trust, but with strict ethical conditions. If she wavered, if she sided with her brother's corruption, a third-party fiduciary would step in. While the lawyers built the fortress, I went on the offensive. I hired Jax, a private investigator and former narcotics detective who knew how to follow money through the mud. It took him less than a week to find the leaks. You were right to be suspicious, Jax told me, sliding a folder across my kitchen table. These design fees and marketing consultations, Maya is billing to your company account. They are going into shell companies registered to Ethan in Delaware. He's siphoning off operating cash to fund the Copper Finch. I looked at the numbers. They were stealing from me to build the very thing that was supposed to replace me, to protect myself physically. I hired a private security firm. Within 24 hours, my old timber house was fitted with hidden cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders. I had the same system installed at the back offices of the bars. I was preparing for a siege. Then came the masterstroke involving the Copper Finch. Since Maya had admitted they used my existing master liquor license to open their new bar, Harold and I made a quiet trip to the State Liquor Authority. We filed a transfer application, moving that master license into the new trust. We added a stipulation the license could only be used for venues where the trust held a controlling interest. Ethan had no idea that the piece of paper hanging on the wall of his new bar was now a leash in my hand. Finally, I went to my people. I waited until closing time at the Docklight and pulled Joey, my head bartender for 15 years, and Marisol, who ran the kitchen, aside. I am not going to ask you to spy, I told them, looking them in the eye. And I am not asking you to choose between me and my son. But bad things are coming. There are things happening with the money and the law that are not right. Joey looked at the floor, shifting his weight. We've heard rumors, Margaret, about the new place, about the biker gangs hanging out there. I just want you to know, I said softly, if you are asked to sign anything, or if you see something that scares you, you come to me. Choose the side that lets you sleep at night. The trap was set. It was a perfect, terrifying paradox. If Ethan continued with his plan to declare me senile, he would lose his inheritance instantly. If he stopped, the forensic accounting would reveal his embezzlement, and he would face criminal charges. He was walking down a hallway where both doors led to ruin, and he was too arrogant to realize I had already locked them both. I invited them over for a Sunday roast, framing it as a dinner to discuss my retirement plans. It was the bait I knew they could not resist. I set the table with the good china, the set Patrick had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and lit the candles. For a moment, looking at the roast beef and the steaming vegetables, I could almost pretend we were still a normal family, back before the greed rotted everything from the inside out. Ethan arrived wearing a new suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He kissed my cheek, smelling of expensive cologne and confidence. Maya was right behind him, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for movers. Lily and her husband, Mark, arrived last, looking anxious, sensing the tension that had become the third guest at every family gathering. We ate. Ethan dominated the conversation, as usual. "It is about elevation." "Mum," Ethan said, gesturing with his fork. "The Copper Finch isn't just a bar. It is a lifestyle concept. We are taking the family brand to a level you couldn't have imagined back in the day. It is the natural next step." "Exactly," Maya added, smiling at me over her wine glass. "The old places, they have charm, sure. But the market is moving on. We need to be agile." I waited until the plates were cleared and the apple pie was served. The room was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon and coffee. I reached under the table, pulled out a thick yellow envelope, and placed it heavily on the mahogany surface. I slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Ethan. "Son," I said, my voice calm. "I want you to read this before we say another word about the future." Ethan frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What is this?" "The deed transfer." He opened the flap and pulled out the stack of papers. The first page was a bank statement highlighting the transfers to his shell companies. The second was a copy of the fake marketing consulting contract. The third, and most damning, was the printout of the email thread between Maya and Dr. Aris regarding the fabrication of a medical history to support a diagnosis of mild cognitive decline. The room went silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as Ethan flipped through the pages. His face went from a healthy flush to a sickly, paste white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Maya leaned over to look. Her eyes widened. She looked at me, and her smile faltered, then twitched into a desperate, condescending grimace. "Mom, you're misunderstanding this," she stammered, her voice pitching up. "These are just drafts, contingency plans. We were just trying to prepare for what I cut her off, my voice slicing through the air like a cleaver. Prepare to throw me into a nursing home so you can sell every brick of the docklight to the highest bidder." "Is that the retirement plan?" Lily dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. She looked from the papers to her brother, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, is this true? You told me Mum was sick. You said the doctor confirmed it." Ethan ignored her. He slammed the papers down on the table and glared at me, his teeth gritted. "Who gave you this?" he hissed. "Who have you been talking to? I have a right to know who the rat is. It doesn't matter who gave it to me." I said, "What matters is what I have done about it. I have established a new trust. Ethan, the Docklight Legacy Trust. Effective this morning. Every piece of real estate and every license is owned by that trust." I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but I didn't care. "And there is a clause," I continued, looking him dead in the eye. "Any beneficiary who attempts to challenge my mental capacity or files for guardianship is automatically and permanently disinherited. You are currently suspended from all decision-making powers within Larkside Hospitality Group, pending an internal audit. Ethan looked like I had shot him, but it was Maya who reacted first. She dropped the mask completely. The sweet daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by a woman with eyes like flint. "Fine," she spat, tossing her napkin onto the table. "Keep your rotting pile of bricks. Margaret, we don't need you. We are building an empire at Copperfinch that will bury your dusty old taverns in 6 months. No one wants to drink beer with a senile old woman anyway." She stood up, grabbing her purse. "Come on, Ethan. We are leaving." Ethan stood slowly, looking at me one last time. There was no apology in his face, only a simmering, childish rage. He felt robbed of what he thought he was owed. I looked at them, my heart breaking, but my spine made of steel. "Anyone who wants to leave can go tonight," I said, my voice low. "But listen to me closely. If you use my name, or my license, or my money again, we will not meet at this dinner table. We will meet in court." 3 days after the dinner, a process server handed me a thick envelope on my front porch. He did not look me in the eye. Inside was the lawsuit. Ethan was not just suing for control, he was suing for my freedom. The petition requested an emergency guardianship, alleging that I was impulsively dissipating family assets and was currently under the undue influence of predatory third parties. A thinly veiled reference to Harold. I sat at my kitchen table, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes, when my phone pinged. Then it pinged again, and again. I opened social media. A local community page, usually reserved for lost cats and pothole complaints, was on fire. An anonymous user named Portlark Truth had posted a long thread titled "The Wicked Witch of the Waterfront: How One Woman is Destroying a Local Legacy. She treats her son like a servant." One comment read, "I heard she fires people if they don't smile enough. Time for the old guard to step down." Read another from an account created 2 hours ago. I turned on the television. The local 6 o'clock news was running a segment. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Family Feud, or Mental Decline. The Battle for Larkside." Sources close to the family say Margaret Hayes has been exhibiting erratic behavior, the anchor said, her face composed in fake concern. It raises the question, is the older generation refusing to let go, even at the cost of the business's future? I turned the TV off. The silence did not last. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from the state tax authority. It was a notice of a comprehensive audit for the last 5 years, triggered by an anonymous whistleblower who claimed there were irregularities in our cash handling. Ethan was scorching the earth. I went to court, but not the way Ethan expected. He stood before the judge, looking somber in his dark suit, and lied with a terrifying ease. "Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "I had to use the master liquor license for the Copperfinch. Mother, she just forgot to sign the transfer papers. She forgets so much these days. I was just trying to keep the business running." I did not speak. I let Harold speak for me. He presented the judge with 3 sealed envelopes. "Your Honor," Harold said, his voice like grinding stone. "These are 3 independent neurological evaluations conducted this week at 3 different major hospitals. Dr. Evans, Dr. Patel, and Dr. Cho all conclude the same thing. Mrs. Hayes is fully cognitively intact. There is no decline. There is no confusion." The judge looked at the reports, then at Ethan. Ethan pulled at his collar, sweat beading on his upper lip. We won the skirmish, but the war was getting bloodier. Later that afternoon, Jax met me in his car parked down by the marina. He looked tired. He handed me a tablet showing grainy photos of the Copperfinch's back entrance. "It is worse than we thought." "Margaret," Jax said, "Ethan isn't just skimming from your accounts to pay for the decor. See these guys? The ones on the bikes. I looked at the men in leather vests, trading thick envelopes with Ethan by the dumpster. That is the Iron Hound's MC." Jax continued. "They move prescription pills through the tri-state area. Ethan is taking cash from them, probably cleaning it through the bar's registers to make the Copperfinch look profitable on paper. That is why the opening numbers are so high." I felt a wave of nausea. "He is laundering money. He is deep in it," Jax said. "And the state liquor authority is catching a whiff. I heard from a contact that they are looking into a full suspension. If they find dirty money mixed with your master license, they won't just close the Finch. They will revoke every license Larkside owns. The Docklight, Beacon, Harbour Line. They will all go dark." I drove back to the Docklight. I sat in my car, watching the warm yellow glow of the windows. I could see Joey laughing with a customer behind the bar. I could see the prep cooks taking a smoke break by the back door. There were 70 people on my payroll, 70 families depending on these jobs. If I exposed Ethan, I risked bringing the federal hammer down on the whole company, potentially closing the doors forever. If I stayed silent, Ethan would continue to use my legacy to wash drug money until the bikers or the law destroyed us anyway. Harold called me as I watched the neon sign buzz. "Margaret," he said, "we have enough to bury him. But if we hand this over to the feds, it is going to get very ugly." "Are you sure?" I gripped the steering wheel. I don't know. "Harold, if I do this, am I saving the business? Or am I the one striking the match that burns it all down?" The report Jax laid on my coffee table was not just bad. It was radioactive. It was midnight, and the only light in the room came from the street lamp filtering through the blinds. Jax looked heavier than usual, the weight of what he had found settling in the lines of his face. "It is not just skimming. Margaret," Jax said, his voice low and rough like gravel. "The Iron Hound's deal in prescription painkillers. Oxy. Fentanyl. They have piles of dirty street cash they cannot put in a bank. So, they bring it to the Copperfinch. Ethan rings it up as private banquet fees or top-shelf bottle service for parties that never happen. He takes the cash, gives them a clean check back minus a 10% fee. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was no longer a civil dispute about ownership. This was a federal felony. "He is washing drug money," I whispered. "He is a laundromat for a cartel," Jax corrected. "And since the Copperfinch is operating under the master license that has your name on it, you are the owner of the laundromat." The next morning, I did not go to the bar. I drove to a diner in a town 30 miles away to meet a man named Special Agent Miller. He wore a cheap suit and looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He was with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I sat in the booth across from him, my hands folded on the table to stop them from shaking. "I know what is happening at the Copperfinch," I said. Miller looked at me, his eyes sharp. "We know too, Mrs. Hayes. We have been watching the Iron Hounds for 6 months. We were just waiting to see how deep the rabbit hole went. I assumed you were the one holding the shovel." "I am not," I said. "I am here to make a deal. Not for my son, but for the 70 people who work in my other bars, cooks, servers, janitors. They have nothing to do with this. Miller leaned in. If you give us the books, the real books, the ones I know you have access to, we can cordon off the Docklight and the other venues. We will treat them as victims of identity theft and fraud. But you have to give us Ethan. Full cooperation. No holding back. I drove back to Port Lark with the weight of the world on the passenger seat. When I arrived at the Docklight, the afternoon shift was starting. But sitting at the far end of the bar, huddled in a hoodie, was my granddaughter, Olivia. She looked small. She was 19, taking a gap year, usually full of brightness. Now, she looked haunted. I sat next to her. "Liv?" I asked softly. She looked up, her mascara smeared. He locks himself in the office. Grandma. Dad. He drinks all day. I heard him smashing glasses against the wall yesterday. He keeps screaming that everything is your fault. She took a shaky breath. I heard him arguing with Mom. He said he can't stop. He said if you expose the money, the bikers won't just sue. He said, if the hounds go down, they'll kill us. Maya. Olivia grabbed my hand, her fingers ice cold. Grandma. Are we going to die? Is Dad going to die? I held her hand, fighting the urge to lie, to tell her it would all be fine. I am going to fix this. Olivia, but it is going to be hard. I sent her home with Ruiz, my security chief. Then I called Harold. We met in the back office of the Docklight. I told him about the deal Miller offered. You have to take it, Harold said immediately. He will go to prison. Harold, I said, my voice cracking. 10 years, maybe 20. He is my son. I changed his diapers. I taught him to tie his shoes. If you don't sign that deal, Harold said, slamming his hand on the desk, you go to prison too. You are the license holder. And those bikers? They thrive on leverage. If Ethan stays in business with them, he is dead anyway. Prison is the safest place for him right now. I walked out into the empty tavern. I looked at the polished wood of the bar, the scuffed floorboards where thousands of workers had stood. I thought about Ethan. I realized that my whole life, I had been standing between him and the fire. When he failed a test, I hired a tutor. When he crashed his first car, I paid the damages. I had never let him feel the burn. And because of that, he had grown into a man who believed he could play with matches in a room full of gasoline and never get scorched. I was not saving him by hiding this. I was enabling his destruction. I walked back into the office. I picked up the pen. The ink looked black as oil. Call Agent Miller, I told Harold. Tell him I will give him the ledgers. I want immunity for my staff. I want the seizure of the copper finch to be executed in a way that doesn't destroy the neighborhood. And I want them to take him into custody before the bikers find out. I signed the cooperation agreement. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like I was severing a limb to save the body. I was cutting my own son out of my life with a stroke of a pen, trusting the cold, hard cage of the law to do what a mother's love no longer could keep him alive. The posters appeared on lampposts and shop windows all over Port Lark 3 days before the event. They were glossy, expensive sheets of cardstock featuring a black and white photo of Ethan looking out over the harbour, his chin tilted up in a pose of visionary determination. Copper Finch returns. A new chapter. The text proclaimed in gold foil, hosted by founder and visionary owner, Ethan Hayes. My name was nowhere to be found. I was erased from the narrative, a ghost in my own city. Ethan had convinced a small group of investors that the temporary closure was merely for a safety system upgrade. He was throwing a grand reopening party to prove the scandal was just small-town gossip. He was betting everything on this night. He did not know that the ground beneath his feet had already shifted. While he was busy designing flyers, Harold and I had executed a series of quiet transactions. The shell company that owned the warehouse building the landlord Ethan paid rent to had been looking to sell for months. The Docklight Legacy Trust bought the property 2 weeks ago. Ethan had never bothered to read the fine print of his commercial lease. It contained a clause regarding change of control and morals, giving the landlord the right to terminate the lease immediately if the tenant engaged in illicit activity. I was no longer just his mother. I was his landlord. Harold orchestrated the timing with the precision of a conductor. We met in my kitchen, reviewing the timeline for the reopening night. "We do not want a raid," Harold said, tapping the schedule. "We do not want guns drawn and customers screaming. That destroys the property value." Agent Miller agreed to a coordinated service of process. At 9 o'clock, right when the toast happens, the marshals walk in. They serve the seizure order, the license revocation, and the federal subpoenas. It will be a surgical removal of the cancer. Lily came to me that afternoon. She looked pale but resolved. She handed me a tablet. "I found these in his sent folder," she said, her voice trembling. "He sent them to the bikers. Read the dates. Mum, I read the emails. Old woman is clueless. We have the power of attorney paperwork ready. Once she is locked away in Pine Creek, the assets are ours. Thank you. Lily," I said. I did not cry. I had no tears left for betrayal. I spent the next 2 days visiting my other bars. I walked through the kitchen of the Harbour Line, smelling the garlic and simmering tomatoes. I shook hands with the bouncers at Beacon Alley. I told them the truth, or as much of it as they needed to hear. "There is going to be a storm tomorrow night," I told them. "But the roof over your heads is strong. I am not selling to a corporation. I am not closing you down. You are family." The night before the reopening, the trap snapped shut. At 7 in the evening, the bank that held the primary construction loan for the Copperfinch, a loan Ethan had personally guaranteed, sent a digital notification. The debt had been sold. The new note holder was a holding company fully owned by the Docklight Legacy Trust, and because the loan was technically in default due to the missed payments he tried to hide, the note holder was calling in the full amount: immediate repayment, $200,000, or immediate foreclosure. I was sitting in my living room when I saw the headlights slice through the darkness outside. The tires screeched on the gravel. Then came the banging. It was exactly as it had been that first night. But now I understood the desperation behind the noise. Ethan was not just angry. He was terrified. He was drowning. And he knew I was the ocean. "Mother, open this door right now." Maya screamed from the porch. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my robe. I walked past Harold, past Nadine, past Ruiz. They stood in the shadows, silent sentinels. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. The door swung open. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, the crowbar in his hand lowered, but still threatening. Maya looked wild, her hair disheveled, her eyes darting around. "You bought the loan," Ethan shouted, spit flying from his lips. "You bought the building. Are you insane?" "You can't just come inside," I said. My voice was ice. "Put the metal down and come inside." They stepped into the foyer, stunned by my calm. They saw Ruiz step out from the living room, his arms crossed. Ethan dropped the crowbar. It clanged loudly against the floorboards. I walked to the coffee table and picked up a thick binder. I held it out to them. "What is this?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. "These are the seizure orders for the Copper Finch," I said. "These are the transfer deeds for the building. And this is the immunity agreement I signed with the federal government regarding the money laundering investigation." Ethan staggered back as if I had hit him. "Tomorrow night is the real opening," I said, looking at my son, seeing the stranger he had become. "But it is not yours. You are done. Ethan. The only thing you own tonight is the choice to walk into that police station voluntarily, or wait for them to come for you at the party." Warehouse Row was ablaze with floodlights that cut through the harbour fog like lasers. The bass from the DJ booth thumped against my chest, a rhythmic, artificial heartbeat. The line of guests wrapped around the block, a parade of silk dresses and tailored suits waiting to get into the Copper Finch. Ethan and Maya stood at the entrance, posing for the local press. Their smiles were wide and practiced, but from where I stood in the shadows, I could see the tremor in Ethan's hands as he adjusted his cufflinks. I stepped out of the dark. I was not wearing a gown. I was wearing Patrick's old leather bomber jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of tobacco and sea salt. I walked slowly toward the velvet rope. The bouncer, a boy named Mike, who used to mow my lawn, saw me and immediately unhooked the barrier. "Mrs. Hayes." Mike nodded, stepping aside. A ripple went through the crowd. "That is the owner," someone whispered. "That is the lady from the news." Ethan saw me first. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He took a half step forward, his eyes darting to the cameras that were already live streaming the event. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice high and tight. You came to congratulate us." Maya grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "Don't let her in," she hissed, low enough that only we could hear. "She is going to make a scene." Security. I did not scream. I did not raise my hand. I simply walked up to the small stage where the microphone stood waiting for the toast. I took the mic from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, silencing the crowd. "I am only here as the founding shareholder of Larkside Hospitality," I said. My voice amplified across the silent street. Maya froze. She could not tackle an old woman on a live stream without destroying their image forever. "I have a brief announcement," I continued, looking out at the sea of faces. According to state filings registered this morning, the Docklight Legacy Trust is the sole legal owner of this building and the liquor license attached to it. The current tenant, Mr. Ethan Hayes, is in violation of multiple lease provisions regarding criminal conduct and financial insolvency. Ethan lunged toward the stage. "Mom, stop it. You are senile. Don't listen to her." I looked past him to a man in a beige coat standing near the bar, Special Agent Miller. I nodded. Miller raised his hand. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the room swung open. Uniformed officers and state liquor authority agents filed in, moving with a terrifying, quiet efficiency. They did not draw weapons, but they drew lines. They moved to the registers. They moved to the office. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Miller announced, his voice booming without a mic. "This establishment is temporarily closed by order of the Federal District Court. Please exit the venue immediately. We are seizing all point-of-sale systems and financial records pursuant to an investigation into money laundering." The panic was instant. The beautiful people scrambled for the exits, phones held high, capturing the collapse in real time. Ethan stood alone in the middle of the dance floor. He looked at the police. Then he looked at me. His face crumbled. It was the face of a boy who had finally touched the stove. Maya was screaming. "You idiot!" She shrieked at Ethan, ignoring the cameras. "You told me the trust was dead. You told me the bikers were handled. We are going to lose everything because you couldn't handle one old woman." I stepped down from the stage and walked up to them. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were painting the room in chaotic strobes of blue and red. "I asked you when the opening was," I said, looking at Maya, "and you told me. We celebrated yesterday. You said you didn't need me." I looked at Ethan, who was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "Tonight, we celebrate again," I said softly. "Only this time, the law is on the guest list." 2 agents approached Ethan. They did not handcuff him, but they flanked him, blocking his exit. "Mr. Hayes," Miller said, "we need you to come with us to answer some questions about your investors." Ethan slumped, all the air leaving his body. As they led him away, Maya turned on him, screaming vile curses, exposing her own complicity with every word, unaware that she was confessing to the gallery of phones recording her. The lights of the copper finch flickered and died, cut from the main breaker. A marshal taped a sign to the glass door, closed by court order. I walked out onto the street. The air was cold. Lily and Olivia were waiting for me. We did not hug. We did not cheer. We walked down Warehouse Row in silence, the sound of sirens fading behind us. I stopped at the corner and looked back. The copper finch was dark, a hollow shell. But in the distance, down by the water, the yellow neon sign of the Docklight Tavern was still buzzing, warm and steady against the night. I had saved the legacy, but as I looked at the empty spot next to me where my son should have been, I let out a long, heavy sigh. I was still standing, but the storm had taken its toll. Thanks so much for listening to my story, everyone. It wasn't easy to tell, but I felt like the truth had to come out. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how I handled things. If you want to hear more stories from my life, please hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary. Give this video a like and smash that hype button to help share this story with more people who might need to hear it. Stay safe out there.